Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and we're going way back in history. Back till, well, music was done in an altogether different way. And I'd like you to meet my guest who can tell us all about Baroque music, right? And you
Yes,
are?
Bernie. I'm Jim Rich. And
Jim, your claim to fame.
well, if anything I do can said to be famous, I am the founder and director of a period instrument orchestra called Jefferson Baroque Orchestra. As you know, this whole area was going to be the new state of Jefferson.
Yes.
And that was last active, I think, in the 1940s. And since our audience and our players are mostly from Northern California and Southern Oregon, and because Thomas Jefferson was a great musician and music lover, it seemed like a good match to make our group the Jefferson Baroque Orchestra.
And the state of Jefferson's quite famous because we were going to be a state of our own.
That's right, we were.
And war broke out. And
That unpleasantness in Pearl Harbor, and everybody sort of forgot about that and got onto something else.
So here we are, underrepresented, and you've picked up the, should we say, the baton, and you've said, let's do fine music.
I did, and although the baton is something I've only used when I was the director of the Rogue Community College Orchestra. That was an orchestra that did later music, and of course that group was all modern instruments. In the Baroque period, generally there's not a leader who just stands in front and directs.
Does the...
Right, in Baroque music, the director is usually the harpsichordist or the first violinist.
And in your case?
In that case, our music director is Margaret Grease, who is a doctoral student in music history at the University of Oregon, and she plays the harpsichord and directs from that instrument. I stand in the back and sing or play oboe or play bassoon, none of which you can do and direct the group.
Because you're back there.
Yes, you're back there, and somebody has to be up front.
And this is where you came into my life this week.
That's right. We had our annual winter concert, and typical winter concert we'll do every 3 or 4 years. We'll do the complete Handel Messiah, the whole 3 hours of it, and then on other years we'll do just the Christmas portion, as we did this year, and usually add a couple of other smaller pieces so that those who have become jaded with Messiah, I don't see how that can happen, will have something else, some other reason to come to the concert.
Well, I have to really be honest, and I live for the last piece in the Messiah concert. I just would listen to that 15 times if you'd let me. What's the story? Why is it so spectacular?
Well, Handel was a great composer, and he was very sensitive to the texts that he set. And now, are you referring to the Hallelujah chorus?
Right.
All right. Now, in the actual architecture of the complete 3-hour Messiah, it comes about 2/3.
Didn't know that.
That's right. And there's something in art called the golden mean. The energy of a work of art usually peaks about 2/3 the way through, and then there's a gentle curve to the end. This happens in painting, it happens in poetry, it happens in music. And it's subconscious. It's, you don't go to school and learn about the golden mean, but when you start analyzing great works of art, you find that it's there.
Build and build
and build to a climax, and you don't stop at the climax. You have to taper off. You have to let people walk out once their pulse and respiration have returned to something resembling normal.
Well, it was in the Santa Clara Valley that I first saw the Messiah presented, and it was so exciting. And the music, we all had our little, okay, what's the word?
Well,
score.
The vocal score.
And we're all singing along,
Yes.
but when they got to the Hallelujah, I just felt like I'd lived for that song.
Yes.
And there was no way, even though I couldn't sing, I can sure hum along and have a lot of fun, but they couldn't have kept me in my seat.
Well, and for the Hallelujah Chorus, typically you're not even supposed to stay in your seat, because now when Handel wrote this piece, he premiered it in Dublin, and then as soon as he'd worked sort of the kinks out of it, he premiered it later in that year in London. And King George II was there in the audience. He was a very phlegmatic German. He was nominally a music lover, but he wasn't a very sophisticated man. And usually for any piece that lasted longer than an hour, he would fall asleep.
Okay.
Well, he was so electrified by the Hallelujah Chorus that he leapt to his feet. And when you are in the presence of the king, a seated king, you may sit, but when the king stands, you may not sit. So the whole audience rose. And to this day, when the first strains of the Hallelujah Chorus start, yum pum 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 pum, when people hear that, the whole audience rises, including people who have no idea why. But it's because a particular Hanoverian king, the music was so great it even got through his dull pate.
And to me as well. It's just so exciting.
It gets to everyone. And Handel, he builds the excitement, and then when he brings in the trumpets and the timpani, it just makes goosebumps on top of goosebumps for everybody. It doesn't matter how many times you've heard it. It always goes right to the heart.
And if you're a novice like well, there it is. Pound, pound, pound.
Absolutely. And I would love to be able to hear it for the first time again. Now, I take that back. I'm not asking for Alzheimer's or dementia, in which case you could hear it brand new every day.
Touche, touche.
But it is a piece that is so fresh, and it doesn't matter whether it's played by modern instruments and a choir of 1,000, or period instruments and our period choir of 12. It's music that just transcends any treatment. It doesn't matter. Amateurs can make a success of it, and the finest professionals can. And it's just designed, that music is designed to be idiot-proof. You cannot do a bad Hallelujah Chorus. It just can't happen.
Oh, and what a joy. Now, it's not the only show that you do with the group of Baroque music.
That's true.
Says you have got something in the Christmas season and something in the spring?
Right. We do a fall concert, a winter concert, and a spring concert. And usually, because our winter concert comes at the beginning of December, it's something related to the season, to Christmas.
Well, so why don't you brag a little bit of what we can expect in these other two seasons?
Well,
any given year you have?
This year, our first concert back in October was music of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. He was the oldest son of Johann Sebastian Bach. And he worked for the Prussian king, Frederick the Great, as his court harpsichordist. And his music was quirky. It was eccentric. And it's not to everybody's taste. And we had never done his music before, and so we put on a program of his music. And those who liked his music were very satisfied, and everyone else stayed away in droves.
But I noticed at the Messiah, there was quite a large crowd, but it's not just in Grants Pass you do this.
That's right. Since we began back in 1994, we've done a Saturday evening performance in Grants Pass and a Sunday afternoon in Ashland.
And Mrs. Brownell, when I asked her to fill me in on you and the music, and she said that Grants Pass has this beautiful environment.
It's true. We do our performances in Grants Pass at the Newman United Methodist Church,
which is history itself.
It is a historic building. It's been sort of it sort of looked like the spiritual heart of Grants Pass for years.
Yes, I just happened to have one of those pictures. Yes. And it's suffered twice with fire.
With fire and lightning this last year.
Right, and it's going to survive. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. But the second one has a different environment. You go to Ashland.
We go to Ashland, and we did use the Methodist Church there, but they're rebuilding their sanctuary.
So you were in a rather modern?
Well, the Unitarian Center is rather modern. It's sort of like an airplane hangar. And
Now there's diplomatic
Well, that's not
comment.
very nice. It definitely has more charm than an airplane hanger, but it does not have the sort of the Victorian charm.
And it was gracious that they said, come over.
That's right. And
But-
they've been very kind to us
And
there.
she was telling me how she would preferred to have been there with my brother, and my husband we went to the Christmas parade instead and watched the kids do their
Right.
thing. How many people in your group?
Well, our orchestra, when we have everybody, is, let's see, we have usually 8 violins, 2 violas, cello, bass, 2 oboe players who also double on Baroque flutes and recorders, a bassoon, 2 natural horns, 2 natural trumpets, timpani, about 24 players.
Wow.
And our chorus is 12. We have 3 of each, 3 sopranos, 3 altos, 3 tenors, 3 basses.
And I read that they come from quite all over the place. You're coming from.
Takilma, well, that's we rehearse usually in Ashland, so for me that's a 160-mile round trip. But since most of the people are from Medford and Ashland, that's the fewest people driving the least distance.
I understand.
But then we had one of our oboists came up this winter from San Francisco, and our music director is from Eugene, and we have a couple who come from Culver City.
Oh, they're serious.
They are serious, but we don't ask them to come to our winter concert because the weather is so iffy. They always play in our fall and our spring concerts. And they have a 1,600-mile round trip.
So that you
which
don't
they
feel
drive.
so bad.
No, my 160, I could do that standing on my head.
I was so pleased because this came my way as a thank you. And you will get a copy of our interview today so we can turn around.
Very good.
I noticed right next to you, you have an Apple computer.
I do. My children have really done their best to keep their father in the loop to the extent possible. And so every time one of them gets a new computer, I get an old one. And so.
Oh, Doug, did you hear that? My husband over there has passed on to me several computers, and he always wants me to have one that's better than the other one.
Well, when I got my first one, it was the very first Apple PowerBook. I think if you want to see one now, you've got to go to the Smithsonian. And to get me to use it, he downloaded a book onto it that you could scroll down the page and then hit a button and it would go to the next page. And it was sort of a science fiction book that he knew that I would want to read. And so every day I opened that computer and I read the book, and it desensitized me and it got me over my initial fear of anything too modern.
I have to go to Doug and say, please, would you see what those people meant? Because my Apple's so old now that he has to put it on his so that he can see what other people are sending me. I'm still in the dark ages. But what all do you have on your computer?
Well, I brought this because it has, right here, it has pictures of the 2 historical replica sailing vessels that I sail on when I'm not blacksmithing or doing music.
Or teaching.
Or teaching. Although I teach and I do music on both of these vessels too.
Oh, you do?
I usually end up being the shantyman, leading the shanties. And because quite often the sailors really can't sing, and people who can't sing are sometimes reticent to sing. But there are 2 rules of shanty singing. One of them is everybody sings, and 2 is nobody doesn't sing. So if somebody who can sing is leading the shanties, everybody feels a little more confident. So that's one of the things I do.
You mean I'd be welcome?
Absolutely.
I don't have to try out.
Hey, there are people who, if their singing ability was a hull, it would have sunk long ago.
I'm safe then. I'm safe. This is wonderful. Now, do you have musicians real people that come on the music?
Well,
bring their violins and their cellos.
When I was on last winter, we had 3 guitarists, 1 violinist, and 1 one person who played a beautiful tenor mandolin, and a number of people who had really very good voices. It was a very musical crew. And, and the captain played the cello, as I recall. And so we had some very nice musical evenings when we were, once we'd put the boat to bed for the night and had our dinner.
Fascinating, just fascinating.
But then music is a part of our educational program too, because every weekday we would see 3 or 4 school groups of 40 children. And after they had rotated through the 3 educational stations, life of a sailor in the 18th century, how officers navigated in the 18th century, and what the purpose of the vessels were, trade, how Boston merchants sent trade goods to the Northwest for the Native Americans, traded for otter pelts that were then sold in China, and then they bought tea, porcelain, and silk and took them back to Boston. And then after those 3 educational stations, we would get the kids together, and as we have them on a halyard raising a sail, we'll all sing a shanty to show them how the rhythm of the shanty helps them work together. And so in that sense, music was a very integral part of the heavy work of running a period sailing vessel.
This kid would sure like to go to school. I don't know how you do that, but
we do sales. When the Lady Washington is in these waters, she does public sales where people get a chance to hear a lot of that history and actually take hold of a halyard and help with the sailing of the ship. So when you see that the Lady Washington is going to be in Crescent City or Brookings or Coos Bay, that's the time to get online. Your husband will help you and make your reservations.
Get on board, all you children, get on board.
Right.
I remember meeting this gentleman 18 years ago. I heard that he was a blacksmith, and I am fascinated about smithing. And I learned that he has no electricity. So let's listen to his story.
Well.
Why? How?
My father, as I said, he descends from a long line of Welsh flour millers. And one of the jobs of the miller is to be the millwright, in other words, keep the machinery running. Now, in the 16th and 17th century, most of the machinery in a mill was wooden. Even the cogs were wood. The only thing that wasn't wood were the mill stones. But in the 19th century, as mills, more and more components were metal, more and more the millwright was a blacksmith as well. And so there is a little bit of blacksmithing in my history. And in the 60s, when the Back to the Land movement was going so heavily, I was a record producer in New York City. And there's nothing very pastoral or relaxing about living and working in New York City. And I was thinking, all right, what can I do in the country to make a living? And I stumbled upon blacksmithing. And then as I was learning blacksmithing at a school back east, I realized I was really recovering some of my own heritage. It had been in my family for so many centuries. I had never, not something that I was encouraged to even think of as a business.
Old-fashioned.
Yeah, old-fashioned, and you wear a blue collar, and I should go out and have a white collar.
Of
course. Some people are not meant to wear a white collar. And I went to school, and I got a degree in music, and I used it in making records, and I used it for 12 years when I taught at RCC. But the things that have given me the most pleasure as, in a day-to-day basis are doing, forging iron. And I do that for both of these vessels. When they need an iron part forged, they'll send me a drawing, and I'll forge it up and send it to them. And of course, I do the music there on both of those vessels. I usually am as I say, the shantyman, leading the musical forces. And so now I've managed to combine all the things: the music, and the blacksmithing, and the sailing, all at once.
I want to go to school, but I don't want to go to school. I just love to learn new things, and that's been a fascination to me. You mentioned the first thing when you came in, you said, my hands. Why don't you tell me about that?
Oh, well, I was, of course, before I came here, I washed my hands. Well, I see that I didn't get everything off. And that's because a lot of the dirt you get to in the shop it gets very deeply ingrained. I've never liked grease, and I'm not a good mechanic. Don't get me under a car. The dirt in a blacksmith shop usually isn't grease. It's just dirt, it's carbon from the coal or from the charcoal. And, but it does get pretty deeply ingrained. It's hard to forge iron and stay clean.
Well, it was fascinating, and I really found it hard to believe that you had no power and such in your place.
In woodworking, power tools can save you a lot of time. If you've ever cut a dovetail joint by hand and then taken one of these new dovetail gadgets that does the same thing that you do in 2 days in 15 minutes, you know that woodworking, there are great economies to be made in electrification. But in metalwork, that's not true. There's nothing I can do with in any kind of tool that would help me to do what I do faster than just by hand. Somebody says, why don't you get an electric blower instead of that bellows? Well, the electric blower, it encourages you to walk away from your work and do something else while your iron heats or while your iron burns up. So when you have irons in the fire, your place is right there, and as long as you're right there, you might as well be pulling that bellows handle. So an electric blower would be no advantage, and it has many disadvantages. Also, the bellows is quiet. I've never seen an electric blower that wasn't noisy. It's hard to carry on any kind of conversation when there's a big fan roaring in the background.
Now, is it a welcoming place for you to show off your work or to put your hired, seemed like someone gave me a
Dinner bell.
Yeah, the triangle with the...
with the striker.
Right.
Right.
And I was so tickled with that gift because, it's something you couldn't just buy. You had to be a gift from somebody.
Yes.
What are some of the pleasures that you find in the connections here? Let's say music and blacksmith and sailing vessels.
Well, there's a connection.
Who are you?
There's a connection. Well, in a way, I'm sort of an 18th century person here in the 20th century, and I'm happy to be here. For as much as I love 18th century music, architecture, sailing, 18th century, it was the age of enlightenment. I also don't want to die of cholera or plague. Or go to one of those dentists that, set up with a bunch of blacksmith tools.
Pulled out of any old tooth. And it is the privilege that we're being recorded and that you'll get to see.
That's true. And I have an iPod where I put I have a whole collection of Bach recordings on an iPod it's smaller than a deck of cards. I don't have to carry a big pile of discs with me anywhere. It's just astonishing. So there are definitely things in our modern life that I'm very happy to adopt once my children have told me how to use them.
How many children and what's the family about?
Well, let's see, 3 children and 5 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild.
Oh, grandfather.
Yes, and
I missed the point. Did they choose to stay in Southern Oregon, or did they move on to?
No, my children are in Eugene and Corvallis, and I have 1 grandchild who's in the Army in Southern California, but she'll be coming back to Oregon when her enlistment is over.
She is.
Yes.
A young woman.
Yes.
Oh, a prayer for all those.
Well, we need to pray for all our service people. They're doing a very difficult, and some might even say impossible job, and they certainly need our best wishes.
Absolutely. I'm here again. You're back to your computer.
Yes.
we have you to thank for putting contemporary excellence. But at the same time, how early back do you go to this music?
Well, our group, our real set of instruments is really good for a period of about 150 years. We play music from around 1640 to around 1760. And before that, our instruments would be too modern, and after that, our instruments are too old-fashioned.
Now, what about this trumpet?
Yes.
With no
valves.
valves.
It's all done with lip, and
so it's kind of like you make the shape of it, or
yes,
the sound.
All the sounds are produced right here with the lip. There's no help with any kind of valve, but it also, because it doesn't have all that extra plumbing that a valve trumpet has, it has a much clearer, more penetrating sound. All these old instruments really, they're not as loud as their modern counterparts. You give up loudness when you go backwards, but you gain intimacy and warmth, which is why we perform in small venues like the Methodist Church. You know, for us, 200 is a huge crowd. And if we were to move, say, over to the new high school auditorium that seats 800, our sound would be kind of lost in there.
But tell me where they're going to find out the future. You have a phone number here. A website.
Yes, jeffersonbaroque.org. And if they want to call us on the phone, we're at 592-2681. Actually, that's my phone number. And anybody who wants can check that website out, or we can actually put them on our snail mail list. We only do 2 mailings a year, so we don't oppress people with mailings.
You filled in the whole story. I am thrilled. I noticed that old-time history, we're all blessed because you have included that in our lives.
Well, thank you. What I love to do is make history really living. It's take it out of the dusty books and bring it to life in a way that's very immediate. People can hear it, feel it, taste it, smell it.
I invite you back again and let me get information about those boats.
All right.
I want to get on board and learn the truth about ships and where they went in a good world of history. Thanks so much for being my guest.
A great pleasure. Thank you, Bernie.